From finding a scene to photograph,
to composing and taking the image, editing and maybe printing,
I'm going to take you through start to finish
of these stages with 3 different images. So let's get started then, and a big thanks to MPB for sponsoring today's video. Right, our first location is a Welsh waterfall that I somehow have not yet visited. Not that I can pronounce the waterfall name, mind you. I'll pop it on screen, and I'm sure one of you will be able to tell me how on earth I say that. It was a short walk through an overgrown and slippery path to the fall below, and I was greeted with a pleasant cascade with a decent amount of water running down it to say that it is summer.
Now, you do have to be careful with locations like this that are very small. There's not a huge amount of space to move around, but the ground is very uneven and potentially slippery. So I'm going to be really mindful as to where I put my feet. So let's take a look and see what we can make of this. So I'm automatically drawn to all of these smaller cascades, all of these streams of water that are coming down from this one pool in various different ways and different directions, but they're all coming together in the same place with this cascade here. So I'm wondering if this could be foreground subject interest with a wide angle lens with that cascade in the background. So if I try and get as many of these streams of water in as possible, it looks okay, but it's a bit busy, it's a bit messy. I think if I popped a polarizing filter on and took down some of the highlights, that might make it a bit more simple, but I think there's possibly too much going on. I don't quite get this stream in on the left either, and I quite like that one. So let's try from this angle and use this stream of water as foreground subject. Yeah, I immediately like that better. And do you know what it is? The other streams of water are taking the obvious route straight down into the pool below, but this one on the left, the far left, it's like a rogue stream of water. It's just doing its own thing. It's going the long way round, and I quite like that. It's taking a longer journey to get down to that pool and that cascade below. So I've set up and I've popped a polarizing filter on already because I know that I want to take down the highlights slightly on the water and these rocks. I'm just going to go through some shutter speeds as I want to decide what shutter speed is going to look best for this flow of water. Now usually I'll aim for somewhere between a 1/4 and a 1/10 of a second, somewhere in between there. I quite like sort of around a 1/6 of a second as my go-to, but I'm just going to take a moment to experiment with my shutter speed and make sure that that is definitely what I want to go for. The light is quite harsh today. To say that it's overcast, it's sort of coming directly down through those trees onto the waterfall, so perhaps a different time of day would give slightly more softer light. But what I'm going to do is use this as a test run, a trial composition to come back and work on, because I think there's a lot of potential here, potentially with different conditions or more water later on in the year coming down this cascade and really making this stream at the bottom there really dramatic, a lot more water, really making it quite striking and drawing your eye to it, because I like this, but it is just lacking very, very slightly in the bottom left there.
You'll find the editing process and the final image later on in this video, but for now let's check out our next location. Right, I think next we are looking for some kind of intimate or macro shot, which shouldn't be too difficult in the forest. Ooh. That looks like mushrooms. See? Not difficult at all. Let's see what we have to work with here. Now, we've had quite a dry summer so far, so I have barely seen any mushrooms about, so this makes me so excited, as you can imagine. I think I'm drawn to this one here that's not quite fully opened up yet. It has yet to sort of umbrella like these two have. These two look great at first glance, but when I get a bit closer, they're looking a bit dishevelled, to be honest. I think I'm going to grab my D850 and the Sigma 105 and see what we can frame up. Right, I like to get as low as possible with my mushroom images, eye level. I find that perspective really, really interesting, as awkward as it is. Let's go back a bit. Actually, even though this mushroom that I'm focusing for that's not fully formed yet and the one at the top, there's quite a distance between them, but despite that, if I go vertical, I actually get that bigger one in the top, in the top left there, out of focus, which looks quite nice, giving the impression that there's an abundance of fungi rather than just one fungus by itself. I've popped a reflector in there, just about some light, and fill in the shadows on the stem. And I'm also using a very, very subtle and soft orangey yellow light to also just bounce some colour onto it so it stands out a bit more. And overall, I really like the framing of this scene, but the one thing that is letting it down for me is the lack of natural light. It's a dark, rainy and overcast day, so we just don't have light, and I think this image is missing contrast. That's what is bothering me about it. I could really do with another light source, which unfortunately I just don't have. I have this idea of soft light coming from the top left down onto these mushrooms, sort of from the side or behind, and then some deep shadows on the right side of the image and in the bottom corner there, creating this natural contrast and really highlighting these mushrooms. I pondered for a while how I could improve this image on location, but ultimately, with the fact that we were not going to get any sun coming through the trees, this was as good as it was going to get, so I focus bracketed a few shots using the focus shift feature on my camera and went on my merry way. Right, third time's the charm. Today, the plan is to find a new area of oak tree. Now, I find that oak trees can have so much character to them, and they tend to be right on the edge of the Forest of Dean, pretty much on the road. Now, the only problem with this is that we are going to get a bit of road noise. After sticking as close to the edge of the forest as possible, a first for me is I usually dive deep into the trees. I struck gold. Oh, I think I have found exactly what I'm looking for. Wow, look how beautiful and magnificent this tree is. That's amazing. I think there are a couple of potential images for this tree. The first thing that I'm noticing is this big branch that's arching overhead, and it's really long. It's like a really long arm with a hand at the end. See how it extends all the way over there? So that could be an interesting 16:9 crop, potentially really long horizontal image. But also where I'm stood underneath the arch, you can see through to another oak tree there as well. You can see how close to the road I am here. I'm telling you, these huge, beautiful trees are right on the road usually. But I've noticed a lot of string and rope hanging off some of the branches of this tree. I guess where people are trying to swing from it, I don't know. So those would have to be cloned out in post. Now, because it is midsummer, we have all this bracken, which is actually quite tall. Some of it is taller than I am. So I feel as though some elements of this scene are sort of getting lost a little bit, especially that tree in the far back there. This is a fantastic find, and I feel the need to really take my time with it and not necessarily take an image today. I want to come back and I want to revisit this tree, this scene in different light and different conditions in autumn. This is definitely an autumn tree, and when all these ferns sort of die back a bit more, it won't be quite so overwhelming, I think. So what I'm going to do is pin my location onto Google Maps and What 3 Words so I can find my way back here next time. I find woodland photography can demand a slower process, and I was perfectly content revisiting another time, as having scouted such a promising and interesting area was a huge success. I found exactly what I wanted to find. Although I did say that I would be taking 3 images in this video, so you'll have to accept 2 this time around. There is so much potential up here in this location. It offers so much. It's such a beautiful bit of forest. I can't believe I've never been up here before, and I can't wait to return in autumn. All the autumnal colours. Oh, this is going to look absolutely fantastic. Right, while I drive home and then boot up the computer to start some editing, I would just like to thank MPB for being today's video sponsor. MPB is an online global platform where you can buy, sell and trade in your used video and photo kit. From cameras to lenses to bags, batteries, MPB makes gear more accessible for everybody and more affordable in comparison to buying new, no matter if you're starting out on your photography journey or just simply looking to upgrade. So this is how MPB works. Someone decides that they don't want a bit of kit anymore, so they do an instant quote service on MPB to see what it's worth. They package it, it gets picked up, and they get paid within days. MPB's product specialist team will test it out, make sure it works, give it a condition rating, and photograph it so that anybody who wants to buy that specific bit of kit can see exactly what it looks like and what they will receive in plastic-free packaging. I've had great experiences with MPB, which is why I recommend them personally, so if you'd like to give them a go, then I'll leave a link in the description box below for you to get started. Otherwise, it's been a few days since we went out with the camera, and I don't tend to look at my photos immediately when I get home. I actually wait a few days. And the reason why I do this is so I can't be really biased with my own images, because I get so excited. I think, yeah, that image I took is the best thing since sliced bread. So if I wait a few days and almost sort of forget what the image looks like to a point, I can then come back to it with fresh eyes, and I'm then likely to see things that I didn't notice before, or ways that I could have improved the image. So I think we'll start with the fungi image first. So I have 25 images in this focus stack, so I'm going to open up Helicon Focus and I'm just going to drag and drop them all into the source images. Now, I don't use Photoshop for photo stacking because generally I don't think it does a good job, especially if you have quite a few images and the scene has a lot of texture or is quite complicated. But I think it's fine if you've got 1 or 2 images and they're fairly simple compositions. I'm not going to use all 25 images in this stack. I would like a fair amount of fallout in the background here. I really just want this fungus in the foreground to be sharp. So I'm just going to uncheck a few images. There we go, we've just got more fallout in the background there. So I'm going to render these, I think I've got 16 images there now. I'm going to render these together. The stack rendered together decently, however there were a few slight misimperfections around the stem area where there is a lot of detail and some overlapping. So using the retouching tab and a brush tool, I used one of the source image files where the stem was in focus just to tidy it up and paint some of the detail back in. I use a graphics tablet and a pen for this, and for a lot of my general editing, I find it gives me much more control and precision than a mouse or a trackpad. I think that looks good, so now I'm going to open this in Photoshop, which is where I edit. Now, if you use Lightroom, I believe there is a plugin for Helicon Focus where you can export directly into Lightroom. There isn't for Photoshop that I know of, so I'm going to have to save this as a file. So I'm going to save it as a TIFF file, and I'm then going to go and open that in Photoshop. In Photoshop, I quickly used the clone tool just to tidy up that stem a little more so that I was happy with it, and then increased the sharpness of the fungus in the front and added some texture. I did not do this to the whole image because there is already a lot of detail in all of that moss, and so it simply doesn't need it. Next, I'm going to make a few simple global adjustments to the image in Camera Raw, decreasing the highlights slightly, adding a touch of contrast, whites and black. The image looks very green, so I'm going to add in a little bit of magenta in the white balance and raise the luminance of those greens a bit so that they pop more. Something that I tend to do in my images is try and subtly exaggerate where light is coming from and where shadows are. Here we actually didn't have a lot of light. I was actually struggling with the light. We do have light coming from the top left there, so I'm going to exaggerate that slightly. So I'm going to use a linear gradient. Let's pull that down. Here I'm increasing the exposure a little bit, adding a haze to give it a sort of soft look, and warming up the white balance just a little bit as well. Now we don't have any deep shadows in this image, and usually I will use those and highlights to draw your eye to a specific part of the image or to a specific subject. And what I want your eye to do is to go from this fungus in the front up to that fungus in the back. So I want to create some shadows around the bottom right here. So I'm going to use the linear gradients again to reduce the exposure in certain areas of the bottom and the bottom right of the image. I do this slowly bit by bit, careful not to overdo it so that it looks fairly natural. I will also desaturate these areas very lightly and add in a cooler tone. Now I'm going to use the brush tool just to erase little areas of this vignette effect so it looks more natural, with some highlights in the bottom still coming through on that moss. After adding in some shadow, I thought that there was a little too much extra space at the bottom and the right side of the image, so we're going to crop, placing each fungus on the grid lines for balance. I want to play with the tones of this image more, so I'm simply making small adjustments to the white balance, saturation and luminance sliders to try and bring through more red or cooler tones to break up the green a little bit. I also tinkered with the shadows and whites of this image while I was in Camera Raw, as I felt as though they needed a slight tweak. I like to use selective colour as well to target the midtones and tinker with hues of specific colours. Moving on to the cap of our fungus, I'm going to dodge and burn it slightly and reduce the highlights a little bit to bring more texture and detail through, as it is quite bright after some rain. I could have done with a polarizing filter on location just to take some of those highlights down a bit. I think I'm pretty happy with this as it is right now. I am going to just turn the canvas to white to see what it looks like there. What I tend to do is do a first draft and then go away from it and come back at some point, whether that's 30 minutes later, an hour later, a couple of days later, because your eyes tend to adjust to the screen. You get used to what the image looks like, and so you're less likely to spot when you've added too much saturation or too much clarity. So for now, we're going to keep it like this, and we're going to come back to it later on to see what that looks like. I feel like I might want to fiddle with the cap a bit more. I guess we will open up our waterfall image. I will go through very similar steps, starting with global edits. So I'm going to warm the white balance slightly and add a slight cool tone to the shadows with the curve tool. I want to soften the shadows slightly and pull down the highlights so that the water for now is almost underexposed, as I don't want the water to be extremely bright. Moving on to light, I'm going to brighten the top right where we have a gap in the trees with a line gradient, adding a little haze as well, and use the brush tool to brighten up some of our shadows around the waterfall so that it looks a little less harsh. Now, instead of using linear gradients to subtly exaggerate the shadows in certain areas of this image, especially in the bottom left corner there, I'm going to create a new layer and reduce the exposure, saturation and warm tones of the entire image. Again, I'm working with a graphics tablet and I'm going to paint back out some of this shadow starting from the top right where the light is coming from. I like to use circular motions, and this probably seems really backwards, but I feel as though I have more control with my shadows here, as all I need to do is change my brush back to white if I took away too much and I want to add more shadows. Sometimes working with lots of radial and linear masks feels a bit tedious. I'll keep turning the layer off and back on just to see the changes that I'm making. I want to draw out some of the light hitting some of these rocks and the surface of the water, so I'm going to use the brush tool to add back in some whites. I'm simply now going to keep making micro adjustments with masks and the dodge and burn tool to create contrast in the water and rocks until I'm happy with how it looks. Finally, selecting the orange tones with the color range mask, I'm going to increase the saturation quite dramatically and try and bring them through a lot more, just to break up that green a little bit. The image is a bit warm for me tone-wise. As I've mentioned before, I really like cool toned images, but it was a warm summer's day, and so I'm deciding to keep the image close to what I saw on location. So I don't think I'm going to tinker too much more with this. I think this is okay. As it's a test shot, I'm not going to get too perfectionist over it. The colours are still not quite right in my opinion, but again, these heavy oranges and heavy sort of warm tones tend to freak me out a bit. So I could probably tinker with that a bit more, but for now as a test shot, I quite like this. This is giving me a lot of ideas and inspiration. Otherwise, this has been a really fun photography practice, practicing my seeing skills, idea building, and I have a waterfall to return to, I have oak trees to work with, and I need another light source to buy for my macro photography. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as well, and I will see you next time.